Caleb Drayton was used to long, empty highways, but the night he stopped at a flickering old gas station in the middle of nowhere, he noticed a child's muddy footprints leading from the pumps into the darkness and none coming back out. The rain had been falling for so long that the world outside my windshield seemed like an endless sheet of gray. My wipers worked furiously, screeching back and forth, but it barely made a difference. The road ahead was slick and dark, reflecting distorted shapes from the few passing headlights. My fuel gauge was hovering just above empty, and the uneasy thought of breaking down in the middle of nowhere made my stomach tighten. According to my GPS, the nearest gas station was still 10 miles away, hidden somewhere beyond the curtain of rain. The dashboard clock glowed faintly, reminding me it was well past midnight. When I finally spotted the faint glow of a red and white sign through the watery blur, it felt like a small victory. The sign buzzed and flickered as if it had been burning for decades. The station itself looked like something from another time, to old pumps, cracked concrete, and a squat rectangular building that probably hadn't been renovated in years. I pulled into the lot, my tires splashing through shallow puddles. The place was eerily quiet. The only other vehicle there was an old pickup parked along the side of the building. Its paint was faded, its metal scarred with rust, and its headlights were off. Rain rolled over its hood in uneven rivulets. Through the hazy windshield, I could make out the outline of a person sitting in the driver's seat, motionless. Their head didn't turn, their hands didn't move, they just sat there, staring straight ahead. I tried to ignore the figure and parked next to one of the pumps. As I stepped out, the cold wind cut through my jacket. The rain seemed louder here, each drop hitting the concrete with a sharp, almost metallic sound. The air carried a strange smell, part wet asphalt, part something faintly sour I couldn't place. My shoes slipped slightly on the slick surface as I moved toward the pump. The machine was old but functional, its paint chipped, and the numbers on the screen faded. I slid my card in, pressed the buttons, and began pumping. The steady click of the fuel flowing into the tank was almost calming against the restless hiss of rain. But then I heard something else, a faint, rhythmic tapping sound coming from somewhere behind the building. It was subtle at first, almost blending into the noise of the storm. But once I noticed it, I couldn't unhear it. Tap, tap, tap. Slow and deliberate, like someone knocking on hollow metal. I kept my eyes fixed on the pump screen, telling myself it was just water dripping from a loose gutter or some piece of equipment swaying in the wind. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that it was too regular, too purposeful. I glanced toward the pickup again. The figure inside was still perfectly still, though now the dim light caught on the outline of their face, revealing pale skin and dark sunken features. My stomach tightened. I turned my attention back to my car, willing the numbers on the screen to climb faster. The rain eased for just a moment, enough for the tapping to become clearer. It was closer now, the sound sharper, almost like fingernails rapping against a metal surface. My pulse picked up as my eyes drifted toward the source. Beyond the pumps, there was a narrow gap between the station building and a tall fence that led into a shadowed alley. The darkness there seemed to deepen, as if it absorbed the dim light from the buzzing sign above. I forced myself to look away and focus on the pump. Just a few more seconds, I thought, then I could leave. But curiosity gnawed at me. I let my eyes flick toward the alley again, squinting through the rain. Nothing moved. The space was empty, just cracked pavement and a dented trash bin tipped on its side. The pump clicked off, snapping me out of my thoughts. I replaced the nozzle, wiped the rain from my face, and turned back toward my car. That's when I noticed something that made my breath catch. The pickup's driver's seat was empty. The figure I had seen sitting there, unmoving for the entire time I'd been at the pump, was gone. The rain roared back, masking all other sounds, but I felt the sudden certainty that I was no longer alone in the lot. My eyes scanned the darkness beyond the pumps, the narrow alley, the shadows pooling at the edges of the building. My fingers tightened around my keys, but I didn't move toward the car right away. Every instinct told me something was watching me from somewhere I couldn't see. I kept telling myself the person from the pickup had probably just gone inside the gas station, but something about that thought didn't bring comfort. The building's front windows were dark, the kind of black that suggested no power, no life. Still, I needed to be sure. My shoes splashed in shallow puddles as I moved toward the entrance, my jacket growing heavier with each drop of rain soaking into the fabric. The buzzing from the flickering sign above the door was loud enough to feel like it was pressing into my skull. When I reached the door, I noticed the glass was cloudy, streaked with dirt and condensation. I cupped my hands to peer inside, but all I could see were vague shapes, rows of shelves, the tall outlines of refrigerators, and shadows stretching unnaturally far into the corners. I pulled the handle, and it opened with a slow, aching creak, releasing a gust of air so cold and stale it made me hesitate. The smell hit next to damp, moldy scent, mixed with something faintly metallic. It was the kind of smell that clung to your clothes and wouldn't wash out. My shoes stuck slightly to the floor as I stepped inside, and the dim light from the lot only reached a few feet before the darkness swallowed it. I stood there for a moment, letting my eyes adjust. The fridges along the back wall were dark and empty. Their glass doors were grimy, as if they hadn't been cleaned in years. The shelves in the middle of the store stood half empty, with just a few scattered cans and boxes covered in dust. It didn't feel abandoned in the usual sense, more like it had been left just recently, as if someone had walked out and never returned. The silence inside was suffocating. I couldn't hear the storm anymore, only the faint sound of something dripping somewhere in the distance. I moved slowly down the center aisle, glancing toward the counter. The register was still there, sitting crooked on the countertop, coated with a thin layer of dust. Behind it sat a single chair, facing the wall, as though someone had been sitting there and turned away abruptly. That was when I heard it again. The tapping, it was faint, but now that I was inside, it was clearer, sharper and closer. The sound seemed to come from somewhere behind the counter, slow, rhythmic, deliberate, tap, tap. Each beat seemed to echo in the stillness. My chest tightened, my footsteps slowing as I approached. I leaned over the counter, expecting to see a person crouched behind it, maybe the owner or some drifter trying to stay dry. But there was nothing, just the dusty register, a stained floor, and a door in the far corner that led into a shadowy back room. The tapping stopped. My skin prickled as I realized the silence now felt different, heavier, like the air had shifted. I turned toward the aisles again, scanning the narrow corridors between the shelves. That was when I saw it. At the very end of one aisle, a pale hand slowly wrapped around the corner of the shelf. The skin looked too white, almost gray, with long, thin fingers that curled one at a time. The nails were uneven, dirty, and chipped. The hand stayed there, unmoving, as though it belonged to someone waiting for me to notice. My pulse roared in my ears. I couldn't see the rest of the body, only the hand and the part of the arm disappearing into the darkness. I stood frozen, every muscle tense, my eyes locked on that pale shape. Then, as if the owner had lost interest, the hand slid silently back behind the shelf. The sound of the tapping returned instantly, but now it came from somewhere deeper in the store. My stomach churned as I realized the sound was moving slowly, methodically from one aisle to the next. Each tap was followed by a pause, as if whatever was making it was listening between each step. I backed away, my shoes making small wet squeaks on the sticky floor. My eyes darted between the aisles, trying to catch sight of movement. The tapping drew closer, aisle by aisle, until it reached the one nearest to me. I could see only blackness between the shelves. Then it stopped again. A few seconds passed, and without warning, a faint shape leaned just enough into view from the end of the aisle, tall, thin, with its head tilted slightly, as if studying me in return. My breath caught and I blinked instinctively. When my eyes opened again, the space was empty. I stood rooted to the spot, staring at the end of the aisle where the shape had just been. My mind scrambled to make sense of it, telling me I'd imagined it, that maybe the shadows had shifted when my eyes adjusted. But my body wasn't convinced. My skin was prickling, and I could feel every beat of my pulse echoing through my chest. The silence was unbearable. No footsteps now, no tapping, just the sound of my own breathing. I forced myself to move, taking a slow step back toward the door. But the moment I shifted my weight, a faint creak came from somewhere in the store. It sounded like an old floorboard giving under pressure, but the sound was wrong. It wasn't steady or direct. It felt intentional, like something was placing its weight slowly, deliberately, trying not to be heard but still letting me know it was there. I turned my head, scanning the aisles, the counter, the shadows that pooled in the corners of the room. The darkness seemed deeper now, as though the light from outside was fading faster than it should. I told myself I'd seen enough. I needed to get back to my car, get back on the road. I started toward the door, my footsteps light, my eyes never leaving the aisles. I was halfway across the room when the tapping returned. Louder this time. It came from my left, somewhere between the shelves, and it wasn't the slow, steady rhythm from before. It was erratic, 3 quick taps, a pause, then 2 more. It sounded closer than it should have been, and my chest tightened in response. My legs felt heavy, as if the air itself was pressing down on me. I turned slowly, scanning the shelves until my eyes caught something unusual. On the bottom shelf of the nearest aisle, a single boot sat on its side, the leather dark with moisture. Water dripped from it, pooling on the floor. The drops were perfectly spaced, each one landing with a soft wet sound that could almost be mistaken for tapping. But it wasn't water dripping from the ceiling, it was seeping from inside the boot. The sight rooted me in place. My mind kept trying to connect it to something rational, but the unease in my gut was stronger than logic. I backed away, my gaze flicking between the boot and the far end of the aisle. That's when the lights flickered. They came on for less than a second, but it was enough to reveal more than I wanted to see. In that moment of illumination, I caught a glimpse of the aisle nearest me. It was completely empty except for a single, wet boot print stamped onto the sticky floor. It was pointed directly toward where I stood. The lights went out again, and the darkness seemed to press against me, thick and suffocating. I couldn't hear the tapping anymore. I couldn't hear anything. The silence was worse than the noise. It felt like the store itself was holding its breath. I turned and moved toward the door as quickly and quietly as I could. My hand gripped the cold metal handle, and the instant I pushed it open, the roar of the storm hit me like a wall. The downpour had grown heavier, pounding against the roof and pavement so hard it almost masked the sound of my own breathing. I stepped outside, but before I could take another step toward my car, I felt a faint movement behind me. The sensation of air shifting as though something had stepped into the doorway I'd just vacated. I didn't look back. My focus locked on my car, the slick black shape waiting under the harsh glow of the flickering sign. My footsteps splashed through the puddles, each one feeling too loud in the emptiness of the lot. I reached my car and yanked the door open, sliding inside and slamming it shut. My hand shook as I fumbled for my keys, but when I glanced in the side mirror, my breath caught in my throat. The pickup truck was back in its spot against the side of the building. I was certain it had been empty minutes ago, but now the driver's door was hanging open. The interior light glowed faintly, casting just enough illumination to reveal the seat inside. It was wet, completely soaked as though someone had been sitting there drenched from head to toe, and even through the storm, I could see the faint shape of water dripping steadily from the seat to the floor, pooling in the darkness beneath. The sight of the open pickup door sent a cold rush down my spine. Rain hammered against my windshield, blurring the edges of everything, but that dim interior light in the truck stayed constant. The glow looked almost unnatural against the storm, a fixed point in the chaos. I tore my eyes away and jammed the key into the ignition. The engine turned over weakly before sputtering into silence. My heart sank. I tried again, my foot pressing the gas, but the car gave nothing more than a dull click. The rain's roar seemed to grow louder in the silence between each failed attempt. My breaths were shallow, my chest tightening with each second that passed. I could see the gas station building through the street glass, its flickering sign casting long shadows that jittered across the lot. Somewhere in those shadows I felt certain something was waiting. I glanced at the truck again. The door was still open, but now there was no light inside. The faint orange glow had vanished, leaving the cab in darkness. My eyes scanned the lot, the alley, the pumps, searching for movement. That was when I saw it. Behind my car, barely visible through the sheets of rain, a figure was moving slowly across the lot. Their head was lowered, their posture unnaturally stiff. Every step they took was measured, deliberate, the water splashing up around their ankles, but never seeming to slow them. I couldn't see their face, just the soaked, dark clothing clinging to their frame and the glint of water dripping from their hands. I twisted the key in the ignition again, harder this time. The car groaned, then roared to life in a violent shudder. Relief flooded me so suddenly that my hand shook. I slammed the gear into reverse, but as I checked my mirrors, my breath caught. The figure was gone. The empty lot stretched out behind me, rain falling in shimmering sheets. My pulse was a drumbeat in my ears. I shifted into drive and pulled forward, my tires skidding slightly on the slick pavement. As I passed the pumps, I risked one last glance toward the gas station. The building looked darker than before, the windows black, the door hanging slightly open as if inviting me back. I focused on the road, headlights slicing through the curtain of rain. My wipers fought to keep up, squealing across the glass. I kept glancing into the rearview mirror, expecting to see something: headlights, a figure, any sign that I was being followed, but there was nothing. Only the endless black road stretching behind me. Still, I couldn't shake the sensation that I wasn't alone. My eyes kept darting to the side mirrors, catching glimpses of shapes that vanished the instant I tried to focus on them. My grip on the steering wheel tightened until my knuckles ached. A sharp metallic smell began to drift through the car. It wasn't the wet asphalt outside or the scent of rain, it was something sharper, heavier, almost like rust. I tried to ignore it, blaming my nerves, but it grew stronger with every passing minute. I rolled the windows up tighter and turned the vents away from me. Then, faint but distinct, I heard it, the tapping. It was distant at first, almost lost in the sound of the rain, but it was there, tap, 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 slow, deliberate, and coming from somewhere outside. I glanced to my right, scanning the roadside, but saw nothing but the blurred lines of the guardrail. The tapping grew louder, and my chest tightened with the realization that it wasn't he coming from outside the car, it was inside. The sound was muffled, but I could feel it, vibrating faintly through the floor beneath my feet. I pressed harder on the gas, the engine straining as the road twisted ahead. My heart raced, my mind scrambling for an explanation, but all I could think of was the open pickup door and the wet seat. I dared a glance into the rearview mirror again. For a split second I thought I saw movement in the back seat, a shadow shifting, too quick and too fluid to be from the light outside. My throat tightened and I kept my eyes locked on the road, refusing to look again. The tapping slowed, stretching the pauses between each sound until they were almost unbearable. I drove faster, the rain blurring everything into streaks of black and silver. My hands were trembling, my jaw clenched so tight it ached. The only thing I could think of was putting as much distance as possible between me and that gas station. But even as the sign faded behind me, swallowed by the storm, the tapping didn't stop. It followed me into the darkness. The highway stretched endlessly ahead, swallowed by rain and darkness, yet I kept my foot heavy on the gas. My eyes darted between the windshield and the mirrors, searching for headlights, for movement, anything that might confirm the crawling suspicion that I was not alone. 10 minutes had passed since I'd left the gas station behind, but the tension in my chest hadn't eased. If anything, it had tightened, growing heavier with every mile. The fuel gauge caught my attention again, and my stomach twisted. It was still pinned just above empty. That made no sense. I'd stood in the cold, soaked to the bone, watching the pump count out every dollar of gas. There was no way it should still read that low. My brain tried to reason it away. Maybe the gauge was faulty. Maybe the fuel hadn't registered yet, but the explanation didn't convince me. The unease in my gut only deepened. The metallic smell inside the car grew stronger, flooding the air with every breath. It wasn't just metallic, it was damp, earthy, and unmistakably wrong. It clung to the back of my throat, making me swallow against a sudden wave of nausea. I reached to crank the vents closed, but when my fingers brushed the passenger seat, I froze. The fabric was wet. I pulled my hand back sharply, staring at the dark patch spreading across the seat. The rain had no way of getting in here. Every window was shut tight. My chest tightened as I leaned closer, and in the glow from the dashboard I saw the color. It wasn't water, it was darker, thicker. My pulse roared in my ears. I forced my eyes back to the road, but every muscle in my body was locked in a rigid, trembling grip. Then, through the hiss of rain and the hum of the engine, the tapping returned. It was louder now, no longer muffled. The sound came from behind me, deep in the car's trunk. 3 steady taps, a pause, then 3 more. The rhythm was deliberate, patient, as if whoever, or whatever, was making it had no need to rush. My hands tightened on the wheel until my fingers ached. I didn't dare look in the mirror this time. The tapping continued, perfectly spaced, each sound vibrating faintly through the seat into my spine. My breathing grew shallow. I wanted to pull over, to get out, to run into the rain and leave the car behind, but I knew, with a certainty I couldn't explain, that opening the trunk would be the worst possible thing I could do. I kept driving, the road blurring beneath my tires, until the tapping suddenly stopped. The silence was worse. Every nerve in my body braced for what might come next. Seconds passed, then minutes. My shoulders began to ache from the tension, but I didn't relax. I couldn't. A faint thud sounded from the back of the car, followed by the soft rustle of fabric. My blood ran cold. It wasn't coming from the trunk anymore. It was coming from the back seat. I didn't turn around. I couldn't. My peripheral vision caught the faintest shift in the darkness behind me, as if the air itself was moving. The metallic smell was suffocating now, filling every inch of the car. My throat felt tight, my stomach twisting into knots. I kept my eyes locked on the road, forcing myself to breathe evenly. The shift came again, a slow, deliberate slide of weight across the seat. The faint creak of the leather was nearly lost under the rain, but I heard it, felt it. Something was leaning forward. In my side mirror, a shape began to form in the blur of motion and rain. It was pale, too pale, and long strands of dripping hair hung over where a face should be. The hair swayed slightly with the car's movement, but the head didn't tilt, didn't shift. It stayed locked in place, as though fixed on me. I gripped the wheel so hard my hands went numb. My vision tunneled on the yellow lines ahead, and for a few seconds I convinced myself that if I didn't look, it couldn't move. The air inside the car grew heavier, pressing down on me, and I realized with a sick certainty that I could hear breathing. Slow, wet, uneven breaths, just inches from my ear. I wanted to scream, but my voice caught in my throat. My entire body was frozen, every instinct torn between slamming on the brakes and never stopping again. Then, just as my vision began to blur from the strain, the tapping started once more, this time directly against the back of my headrest. 3 slow taps, a pause, and then nothing. When I finally forced myself to glance in the mirror, the back seat was empty, but the wet patch on the passenger seat had grown, and faint red droplets were now sliding down the center console, pooling near the gearshift. The rain outside swallowed the sound of my heartbeat, but it couldn't drown out the thought that kept clawing at my mind. Whatever had been in that gas station had followed me, and it wasn't finished yet.